We're going to deal with a difficult topic tonight. Well, I think it's difficult, but then I've been a conflict avoider most of my life. I am a recovering conflict avoider now. We're going to talk about dealing with a strong personality or a controlling personality. Does anyone have anyone like that in their life? Anyone in this room? Mm-hmm. Everyone's like, maybe. Okay. Well, why would a husband in particular, or anyone, try to excessively control his wife, or talk over her, or ignore her, or completely dominate a relationship? Like, why would that happen? That's the first question. Like, why would anyone do that? And I was praying about this, and I believe God showed me 4 common reasons that a person would be excessively controlling or domineering or just kind of almost trounce right over you, roll right over you. First, insecurity. Maybe due to unresolved wounds from childhood. That could be a reason why someone would act like that. Or fear. Fear would be another one. For instance, like if your husband was hurt in the past, he may live in fear of being hurt again, so he's going to try to control you and situations and everything so that no one hurts him again, or nothing unexpected happens. That's often based in fear. Pride would be another reason. If a person, your husband or whoever, is striving to feel important, significant, get others to really notice them, be in awe of them, they will often talk a lot, inject their opinion while dismissing your opinion, dominate conversations with their superior intellect, that kind of thing. And then the 4th reason would be just plain self-centeredness and narcissism. Maybe just attempting to manipulate you so that you do what he wants to do, which is just actually selfishness, wouldn't you say? Realize that if your husband or whoever you're thinking of right now is acting inappropriately based on those first 2 things, insecurity or fear, we really want to strive to have a balance of compassion and boundaries. And we'll get to boundaries in a while. But out of hearts of compassion, does God want you to maybe talk gently with that person about the benefits of seeing a trained counselor to deal with maybe unresolved wounds from childhood? Or reassure that person that you're for them and you want to help them explore the fears that are tending to come out as controlling behavior. Maybe suggest, if it's your husband, that maybe he would benefit from a 12-step program, like Valiant Warriors that meets here at the Way on Monday nights. Maybe that would be a benefit to walk through a 12-step program. But beyond being compassionate, it is not God's plan for you to be controlled, manipulated, intimidated, ignored, or bulldozed by your husband, or anybody else for that matter. It is not God's intention. I just want you to hear this so clearly. It is not God's intention. I mean, I know we read so many verses about how we're supposed to love other people, and that's true. But I don't see anywhere in the Bible that God says, and you shall be bulldozed by other people. Don't see that. Or that you're supposed to be, intimidated and manipulated and bullied and controlled. Don't see that anywhere. In fact, speaking of husbands, God specifically tells husbands to be considerate toward their wives and respectful. That's in 1 Peter 3, verse 7, which says, husbands in the same way be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them with respect as the weaker partner, and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. And then in general, just beyond specific instructions to husbands, God tells us several times in His Word that we are supposed to care about each other and submit to one another. Do you hear the each others in there? The each others, like both people. In other words, one person isn't supposed to be more important than the other person. One person in the relationship is not supposed to completely dominate the relationship and then selfishly seek to fill all of their desires while ignoring yours. That is not God's plan. Listen to a couple of convicting verses. Philippians 2, starting in verse 3. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you, there's another one of those each words like both of you, let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Galatians 5:13. For you were called to freedom, brothers, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. Here are all these one another's and each others, and when you think of those phrases, what does that tell you? Both people are important. Both people are supposed to be caring about the other. This means that your husband, your mother, your sister, whoever that person is in your life that seems to be kind of controlling or domineering, that they're out of alignment with God if they are regularly dominating the conversations, if they care little about your opinions or needs or feelings, if they frequently try to manipulate and control you into doing things their way and what they want, or if they frequently blame shift in an attempt to make you feel so bad that you cave into whatever they want. That is not in alignment with the Lord. And you get to decide. Here's where you come in. You get to decide if you want to put up with that behavior, because you can. You can. Especially if you're a conflict avoider, you might. But it's your choice. It's up to you. Instead of wringing your hands, though, or slowly sinking into a big pool of resentment, which is likely going to happen, you can take action. And we'll talk about what to do in a moment. But first, let's maybe unpack a little bit more what I mean by controlling behavior or narcissistic behavior. So first, what behavior falls into that category of excessive controlling? And I'm going to speak mostly about husbands here because your wives here, and most of you listening might be wives, and so I'm going to use husbands as an example, but you could insert another person into this equation if you'd like, if it's someone else that you're thinking of who might be controlling. But a husband, for instance, if he's controlling, may demand that you follow his advice in all areas of life, all the time. And he might really react strongly if you do not follow what he says to do. He might try to keep you from talking with people who might disagree with him on anything. He might lecture you on where you should and shouldn't go, and what you should or should not eat. I had that happen once. Okay, let me just digress. Because I asked my husband's permission to share. Because my husband has had a tendency to be controlling in the past. I say in the past because I don't really put up with that anymore. So he had to kind of like, you can only be controlled if you let the other person control you. So for instance, on like our third date, this is going way back, I knew I had a controller on my hands because it's like our third date. We hardly even know each other. And he comes over to pick me up, and I thought, I just need a little bit of chocolate. Have you ever had that need? You just need a little bit of chocolate before you head out the door. It's like a need. And so I just reached up to a bag of chocolate chips, and I took out like 3 chocolate chips, and he grabbed the bag away from me and said, I don't think you should do that. And I was like, what? Come again? And I remember saying something along the line of, if you think you're going to tell me what to eat and if I should eat chocolate or not, this is never going to work. And he's like, oh. And he never said that again. But that's like controlling behavior. I just had to give that example. I have more examples as we move along here. But that's just one example of, telling you what you should or should not eat, when or how you should exercise, when you should read the Bible because they're more spiritual than you. They know which translation you should be reading and how often you should be reading the Bible. He might demand that you attend certain social functions or clubs or church classes or rearrange your personal space in your house. This just happened this morning. Just this morning. I had to just laugh my head off because I was like, here I am typing up this lesson, and he comes in my office. He literally takes my calendar off the wall of my office, in my house, in my office space, takes it off the wall, and says, this doesn't look good here. I'm going to put it over here. And I was like, what? This is my office. This is my space. And he goes, yeah, but this doesn't look good here. I'm like, I will take care of my space. It's like, really? So I'm still dealing with it, apparently. But yeah, he has a tendency to be a little bit controlling. He's not a perfect person. He'd be the first person to say that. None of us are perfect, so that's maybe his little thing, is that he tends to be a little controlling. But notice how I'm not letting him get away with it. Yeah. I'm taking a stance. We don't make a big to-do about it. In fact, I chuckle about it, and then that makes him laugh, and then I put the calendar back on the wall where it was in the first place. Good girl. Yeah. Now, all this being said, you may be wondering about the difference between biblical submission to your husband and him being overly controlling. Because, where is the line here? And here is the difference. You need to be able to be in charge of you and your personal life. You need to be able to be in charge of you and your personal life. And you will eventually answer to God as an individual. We all have to answer to God as an individual. I don't get to go up there and say, well, my husband told me that I should be it's like, no, I'm responsible for my life before God. Romans 14, starting at verse 12. So then each of us will give an account of himself to God. Therefore, let us not pass judgment on one another any longer, but rather decide never to put a stumbling block or hindrance in the way of a brother. So I'm in charge of me and my personal life. However, a wife is supposed to submit to her husband in the sense of showing him respect and honor and allowing him to lead the family in major decisions, as long as those decisions are not destructive or sinful or immoral. Colossians 3:18 puts it this way: wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. So I let my husband lead. I try to allow him room to lead the family. Way early on in our marriage, we discussed, well, who should take care of the finances? And I said, what would you like to do? Instead of me just swooping in and saying, I'll take care of that, which I kind of wanted to do, frankly. But it's like, what would you like to do? And then allowing him to do that. Does he do it perfectly every single time? Exactly how I would pay the bills, exactly the day that I would pay the bill? No. As long as there's not a catastrophe, as long as he's not leading us off a cliff, I'm choosing to honor him by allowing him to lead. Does that make sense? Okay. What do you do, though, if a husband really is trying to control you? And I've had some personal experience with this, so let me tell you. So first, ask the Holy Spirit to give you the right timing and the right words for just a gentle discussion with your husband. And maybe take that real humble posture and ask him to explain why he tends to want to try to control you, try to control things. A good opening line we've learned at Squadron of Sisters is, help me understand why, fill in the blank. Help me understand why you thought it was so important to rearrange my whole kitchen without asking me when I'm the one doing the cooking. Yes, I've had that happen too. I have so many examples. Yeah. Anyway, so I did ask him that question because I came home one day and all the spices were in a drawer instead of who puts spices in a drawer? Does anyone put spices in a drawer? Well, anyway, they were in the drawer. They were in the drawer instead of in the cupboard, and I was like, what? I'm the cook. Why would someone do that? So I had to have that gentle conversation saying, so why did you think that they should be here? And I'm thinking I can't wait to tell him how dumb this is. And then he calmly explained that this was more practically and gave me some reasons, and I actually listened, because sometimes I do that. And it actually made sense. So guess what? Our spices are still in the drawer. But I just had that gentle conversation like, help me understand why. Sometimes there's a legitimate reason. Be a good listener. Truly hear your husband's heart as to why he does and says the things he does. Is he fearful about losing you? Is he acting this way because he's been hurt by someone or something in the past? Maybe express empathy and compassion. Pray with him, for God to comfort him. Pray that God would cause him to trust you and your situation. That he would just trust God in those situations instead of trying to control. Now, if he keeps up with the controlling behavior and it just doesn't stop, you're probably going to have to sit down again and be more direct. Let him know that when he controls you or tries to control you, let him know how it makes you feel. Does it make you feel unimportant? Or like you're a little child? Or intimidated? Or stupid? Or sad? Or frustrated? Let him know how it makes you feel. And then ask him to trust God and to let you be your own person instead of him trying to control you. Ask him to respect your right to make your own decisions about your behavior, your hobbies, your personal space, what you're going to eat, your friendships, as long as they're godly friendships and not with another guy or something. You might even need to remind him that 1 Peter 3 tells husbands to respect their wives. And here was my epiphany. This was my personal epiphany in all of this, because I was faced with many controlling attempts. I realized one day, I cannot be controlled unless I let the other person control me. Duh. I don't know. Sometimes it's just like rocket science that happens in my head there. It's like, I can only be controlled by someone if I allow them to control me. Unless this escalates to actual abuse, his attempts to convince you to do things his way or bully you into doing things his way don't have to succeed unless you let them. Don't lose sight of the fact, again, that he is supposed to treat you like it says in Ephesians 5:25. Husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for you. Which means he should respect your right to make decisions. Unless he feels like there's something totally immoral going on, and then you can have a conversation. So again, I have to frequently remind my husband and say, no, that's what I said this morning. Like, this is my office. You're not. I will put the calendar where I think the calendar should be. And there were many discussions after that about other things in my office that he thought were not correct. It's like, this is my office. I'm very happy. I like blank walls. It's peaceful to me. He goes, this is so empty. I'm like, I like peacefulness. I don't like a lot of clutter. It's like, and at the end of the day, I won, in a sense, that this is a competition, but it's like, this is my personal space. I'm not letting you control my personal space. You can only be controlled by someone if you allow them to control you. If he really continues to try to control you and just does not stop, it might be time for Matthew 18, verses 15 through 17. You can look that up, which really is about taking this to the next level of maybe going to a pastor or a counselor and talking this out with some objective and qualified other parties to bring into this equation. Okay, that's controlling behavior, but what about narcissism? What is the definition of narcissism? A person who is extremely self-centered with an exaggerated sense of self-importance marked by excessive admiration of or infatuation with oneself. That is the definition of narcissism. But here's the thing. Narcissism happens on a sliding scale. It's like a sliding scale. A person with an actual narcissistic personality disorder is extremely self-centered and arrogant. I mean, they are extremely so. The person in your life may be just moderately self-centered, which we tend to call a strong personality or a high-maintenance person. Have you ever used that language? I have. It sounds nicer than saying, you're narcissistic. You're high maintenance. You're a strong personality. But it's all self-centeredness, just in varying degrees. The Mayo Clinic says a person with a narcissistic disorder displays many of 13 common symptoms, and this is for a true narcissistic personality disorder. And I just want to run down these super quickly. More than likely, the person in your life is not going to be diagnosed at this level, or maybe they are, I don't know. But here are the 13 symptoms of an actual narcissistic personality disorder. The person has an exaggerated sense of self-importance, a sense of entitlement. They require constant, excessive admiration. They expect to be recognized as superior even without any achievements that warrant it. They exaggerate their achievements and talents. They are preoccupied with fantasies about success, power, brilliance. They believe they are superior and can only associate with equally superior people. They monopolize conversations and belittle or look down on people they perceive as inferior. They expect special favors and unquestioning compliance with their expectations. They take advantage of others to get what they want. They have an inability or unwillingness to recognize the needs and feelings of other people. They have an envy of others, and they believe others envy them. They behave in an arrogant manner, coming across as conceited, boastful, and pretentious. And lastly, they insist on having the best of everything. That's why they usually end up with spending problems, because they have the best car, the best TV, the newest phone, go on and on and on, right? And hopefully you do not have someone who would be clinically diagnosed this way, but those are the symptoms of narcissistic personality disorder. What can you do if your husband, your mother, your sister, whoever, seems to have some of these symptoms, or maybe in a more moderate level, and we just call them a strong personality or a high-maintenance person, but have some real self-centered tendencies? What can you do? First of all, do not enable their self-centeredness. Do not enable their self-centeredness. God had harsh words for one of the churches in Revelations that tolerated blatant sin instead of taking a stand. This might seem like an odd verse to throw out there, but I thought it was a great example because God does not want us to tolerate or enable blatant sin to continue. So let's look at Revelation 2, starting in verse 19. God says, I know your works, your love and faith and service and patient endurance, and that your latter works exceed the first, but I have this against you, that you tolerate that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess and is teaching and seducing my servants to practice sexual immorality and to eat food sacrificed to idols. let's not focus on the sexual immorality and the food sacrifice to idols part, but the tolerance. They were tolerating sin. They were just enabling it to continue by just kind of ignoring the problem. So what are some examples of taking a stand so you're not enabling that self-centeredness to continue? Refuse to walk on eggshells. Refuse to just constantly be walking on eggshells. And be willing to allow that person to be unhappy if you don't do everything their way. I think that's a huge one right there, so I'm just going to repeat that. Refuse to walk on eggshells all the time, and be willing to allow that person to be unhappy if you don't do everything their way. I'm not saying that there isn't a day that you couldn't walk on eggshells, because sometimes your husband might come home after the worst day ever, and out of just kindness and mercy, you might just say, today, I'm just going to kind of tiptoe around a little bit because he's highly stressed out. But if this is a constant behavior that you're always walking on eggshells, then something's wrong. Another example of taking a stand so you're not enabling self-centeredness, if they spend excessively to have the best of everything, you might need to create a separate bank account for yourself. Or talk about some way that you can split up finances so that there is some level of control of the money and you guys don't go bankrupt. Another example, stop waiting on them hand and foot. Expect them to take care of some of their own needs. Another example, if their self-centered choices get them into trouble, such as maybe that teenager who gets detention at school, or that husband who gets arrested for DUI, or maybe they get in trouble at work for calling in sick when they were actually playing golf. Don't cover for their poor decisions, their poor choices. Don't bail them out. Allow them to experience the pain of their own choices. Okay, secondly, establish boundaries in the relationship in order to protect your heart. God wants you to protect your heart. Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. So an example here, if the person is getting disrespectful or rude as they're being all dominating in the relationship, you might need to walk away or even drive away for an hour or two instead of just kind of allowing them to just mow over you and mow over you. Another example, if the person is blaming you for their own problems, calmly but firmly tell them that what they're saying isn't true. And then maybe you even have to walk away from those blame-shifting words. Number 3, foster relationships with other relatives and with good girlfriends to get your needs met for empathy and compassion. Because often a narcissistic person has a very difficult time being empathetic and compassionate. And you probably need that. So you might need to look to some girlfriends, some godly girlfriends, or other relatives to get those specific needs met, at least at this immediate moment. Next, pray fervently and strategically for as long as it takes. You have to become a ferocious prayer warrior, ladies. You have to pray for your husband's heart to change, because this is a heart condition, isn't it? Self-centeredness is a heart condition. So a couple of ideas on how to pray. Ask God to convict them of pride and to give them a true, humble view of themselves instead. Romans 12 verse 3 says, I say to everyone among you not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment. And ask God to create a clean heart and renew a right spirit inside that person. That's Psalm 51 verse 10. Create in me a clean heart, renew a right spirit within me. And then pray for the timing and the words, and have a serious conversation with this person, your husband, your sister, your mother, your brother, whatever. Have a serious conversation about their behavior. You may need to tell them that you have noticed the relationship is out of balance. You may need to actually explain that your feelings, your needs, your opinions are being ignored, and this needs to change. Now, I know for my fellow recovering conflict avoiders, this is not fun. They're like, can't I just take a pill and make this all get better? Like, why do I have to talk to them about it? But this is what we need to do. We need to ask the Holy Spirit to give us courage, timing, the right words, and have that frank conversation where we say, this relationship is not balanced. My needs, my opinions, my thoughts, my desires, they are also important, and they are being ignored, and that must change. Often the other person is oblivious, so you're probably going to have to spell this out and tell them what the requested change will actually look like. You're probably going to have to spell this out for them because it's just not going to connect. Here's an example. You might have to say something like, we need to take turns every other time about where we're going to go to dinner, or where we're going to go on vacation, or whatever the plans are. We need to take turns every other time. Let's do that every other time. You have to be like that clear sometimes because they're so used to just running right over you that you have to spell out what the change would even look like. You might have to say something like, when we're having a conversation involving opinions, we need to each give each other 5 minutes. Let's set the timer. 5 minutes, each of us gets to state our own opinions, and no one can interrupt during that 5 minutes. And then afterwards, we have to reach a compromise that represents the views of both of us. A compromise that really reflects the views, the values of both of us. Wow. That would mean that he would actually have to listen while you're talking, because otherwise he would have no idea what your interests even are. So that would be a way to explain it, saying we each get 5 minutes. When we're having this kind of disagreement or whatever, we each have 5 minutes. We set the timer. You listen to me, I listen to you, and then we have to reach a compromise that reflects the desires, the feelings, the values of both of us. That's like spelling it out. If finances are a thing, maybe you sit down and say, we need to agree on a limit. Maybe it's $100, maybe it's $50. There's going to be this limit that neither one of us can spend more than that, unless it's paying a regular, like, electricity bill or something. But discretionary spending. No one can spend more than $50 unless they call the other person and the other person agrees. This is what, again, having to spell it out, because often that narcissistic person or high maintenance person or strong personality person is used to just rolling right over you, not even caring at all what you're thinking. You have to spell it out, what it looks like to have a more balanced relationship.